Hi, welcome. Welcome to episode 29 of 50 Women Over 50. It's my podcast and it's for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. My name's Sherrilynne Starkie and I'm your host. In this podcast series, I'm interviewing 50 women from all walks of life who are over 50 years of age, and I want to find out what they've learned by this decade so that we can learn from them all. And today, I'm welcoming to the show clinical psychotherapist and transition coach, Kirsten Beske. And she's certainly a transition expert born of her own experience. She started out adult life as a corporate lawyer, married to a wonderful guy, and by 50, she became a psychotherapist, got divorced, and fell in love with a fantastic woman. Then, just as she was approaching the empty nest stage of her life, she doubled down on parenthood by adopting a 7-year-old little girl. In this interview, she talks us through the many dramatic turns and twists in life and shares with us the lessons that she learned along the way. Welcome to the show, Kirsten. Tell me all about your 50th birthday.
Yeah, so 50th birthday, I was in a unique position because I had moved out of my ex-husband's home, right, and moved into my own home for the first time with my 2 kids. And I had a really strong group of women friends, and we're all sporty. At that time, I was still playing ice hockey on a women's ice hockey team, and we just loved games. So on my 50th, which is in the summer in May, I've got the May birthday coming up now, I hosted a cornhole tournament in my backyard. Oh, nice. So I had everyone come over, and we had to pick teams, and we had a draw, and we made it formalized a cornhole tournament. And then it started a tradition. So on my birthday each year since then, we get together and have another cornhole tournament. So it was the beginning of a new chapter for me that. Yeah.
So long-term marriage?
Well, so we had been married at that time. So this was back in 2011. So it seems like a long time ago now. Since then, it was about 10 plus years. My kids are now 21 and 23. I've remarried and I remarried a woman, which was not in my life plan, but I love her very much. And so the marriage seems like a long time ago, and he and I still co-parent really well together, and he's a marvelous guy. And so it was definitely one of those all's well that ends well. In that regard. Yes. And kids have a great relationship with him still. So it didn't blow everything up, any more than it would have normally. But so it had been, I think the kids were about 8 and 10 when we split up. And it turned out, I talk about this sometimes, it turned out to be a really good experience. But at the time I thought I was basically ruining my children's lives, because I had certainly never intended to get married to get divorced, and certainly didn't intend to have children to get divorced. Yes. For them. But in the course of breaking up the marriage is when I came out to him that I was, we'll just use the word gay, right? Because it was something I didn't know about myself before. And it was a surprise to everybody, him, me, everyone. And I did tell the kids at that time, which I made the choice to, and I didn't know if that was the right choice or not, but it seemed like it would be nice for them to have an explanation of why the marriage was ending that did not blame their dad, because that wasn't the goal. And now here, 12 years later, I've got 2 kids, those exact 2 kids who have since come out to me in different ways. One of them has decided that they really feel non-binary, which I know is a lot of kids these days are doing that, but this is a very heartfelt place that they're coming from. And I use they, them pronouns now, like a pro, but I gave them this place where they felt comfortable to be themselves. And the same with my son, but it made both my kids more able to be authentically themselves and not fear me rejecting them, because I had already done the scary part of that leap at that time. Yeah. And I didn't know that. I just figured I ruined their life. And so it was really lovely when things all came around to see, and what a good role model my current marriage is for my kids as a really healthy couple. And there's more kids involved now too, because my wife had 2 kids that she had adopted when they were little from the foster care system. And then we discovered about 4 years ago that they had a little sister that nobody knew existed, same mom. and she needed a home. And so she came to live with us about 4 years ago, and she's 11 now. And I was just about hitting the empty nest phase on my end. We weren't married. We stayed separate for 10 years of our relationship so our kids could just have some stability, if that makes sense. We each had been divorced. So when we joined families and this little girl came along, it's been like this joy, but I absolutely had a little whiplash because I thought I was done. I am done. All of the kids were supposed to be off at school. We were going to be empty nesters, and now we're parenting an 11-year-old in 5th grade. And so
life takes many, many turns, that's for sure.
Yeah,
but I'm particularly interested in drilling down a little bit on that. How it all coincided that as you were turning 50, like 50 years is a lot of living. And as you're turning 50, you're discovering these new things about yourself. You're making major life changes. And it sounds like it's been a lot of change since as well.
Right.
Do you think that your progressing age forced you to look at issues and make some decisions? Like, could you have made this decision at 40 or at 30?
Right. Well, interestingly, I consider myself a bit of a change expert because I was a practicing lawyer for 14 years. I was a partner in my law firm. And then I had my kids as a partner. So I had my successful career, my air quotes. And then I just decided to have my kids a little bit later. I think I was 34 and 36 when I had my kids, and their dad was even older. And so at some point, each of them almost died in infancy. Conveniently, they did not die, but they had some severe health issues. My firstborn had a heart tumor that had to be removed by like a heart-lung bypass, stop the heart, take out the tumor thing when she was 3 weeks old.
Oh my God.
And then my son was born right after 9/11 attacks occur here in the US. And he was 3 months early because I was at risk for preterm labor. And I was trying to go to the funeral of a friend of mine who died in one of the towers. And instead I had Corey. And so he was in the hospital for a good 3 months with a lot of almost dying opportunities before he finally came home, still very fragile. And so the stress of all of that and the 9/11 attacks and almost losing the kid and all of the things made me really think about what is the meaning of this life? Why do we bring life into this world when bad things are happening simultaneously? And when I got down to the bottom, I realized that when I went into the law, I thought I was going to be able to help people. That was my altruistic goal. But by the time you start practicing law and paying back your law school loans, you're working for big companies. I worked for a big firm in Boston before I came here to where I practiced in Vermont. And you're working for big companies, saving big companies money, but it's not exactly gratifying in that way. Like it's intellectually challenging. And it for me, it was fun because I was a litigator and I got to go to court and try cases and argue to the Supreme Court of Vermont. But when you get down to my value system, I wasn't fulfilling that value of being more helpful and of service to people. And so I went back to school and got a master's in clinical psychology and left my law practice and became a psychotherapist. And I had a private practice for over a decade. And I had already done that before I got divorced.
Right.
And so the next leap of moving into being a single parent, essentially, at least getting divorced and being on my own, it just seemed like another evolution of this process that had already started of really like leaning into my authentic self, whereas the self that was the lawyer was the self that did all the things that they were supposed to do. You know, I got all the straight A's. I went to Harvard. I played tennis at a high level. I blah, blah, blah. I did all the right things and then it got me into this place where I really wasn't happy. Right. And so to deconstruct all that and then rebuild what will make you happy has been my life's work since then. So turning 50 was absolutely a turning point, but it was not how I pictured it. I did start my business. Now I run a business now, a coaching business, where I help women through transition, especially later in life, women 40 plus, to reinvent themselves for this next stage of their lives. And I thought that was going to be my baby. as I empty nested and the kids moved on and got older.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the 11-year-old showed up, that was a real like, whoa, this wasn't how I pictured my evolution.
Mm-hmm.
And I always find that like life challenges you in ways that you need to be challenged. And that idea of continuing to have fun as you age and making sure you don't get too serious and you don't really just get so responsible that you forget to carve out some time to actually enjoy yourself. It's been a really nice reminder to have a young one running around.
Yes.
Keeping you young and reminding you, oh yeah, I need to play too. And on my way I arrange my work week, I don't see clients on Mondays and Fridays so that I can carve out part of my day to go have fun. So I was able to go play golf Monday afternoon this week in this gorgeous weather we're having. That's been such a pleasant surprise and feel good about it. And I was extra productive in the morning getting stuff done because I knew that I'd get to go play in the afternoon, right? So I think being 50 helps you appreciate the depth of things a little bit more, but not in the ways I predicted it would.
Do you think, based on your practice, that women over 50 have enough fun generally?
I think that they're just beginning to give themselves permission to. At least with the clients I work with, a lot of them finally are done their parenting responsibilities at that point, and they're just starting to explore like what's possible now, because I have dedicated all my time and energy to my family and the kids. And yes, I've had fun along the way, but it's never been about me, right? And suddenly they're able to kind of actually really focus on themselves. And so part of the framework that I work with when I work with my clients is to make sure that they are including the fun part in. And usually people can come up with things that they'd like to do for fun, but there's quite a few people that have not thought about how they have fun for so long that they actually are a little lost. Like they really, They don't remember what they have done for fun. And so it's a nice process to get to jumpstart that, because it's lovely to watch people relearn how to have fun again.
So that's one of the reasons why I started this podcast, because I felt that I wasn't having any fun. It was all work and no play. Yeah. And so I've carved out about 8 hours a week to spend on creating something with this podcast. And it is fun. You're right. Fun should be a priority for all of us at all ages, but even more so when we're in our 5th and 6th decades, because, we've paid our dues and we've earned the right.
Absolutely. And there is that role modeling for the younger generation that getting old is not that bad because you can still have fun. Mm-hmm. And so I think that I'm also a student of positive psychology, which is the science of how we thrive. And when I started doing my coaching work, that was my framework that I got trained in to move into coaching. And there's a lot of elements that you have to hit to make sure that you have that life well lived. And the idea of achievement, which you wouldn't think would necessarily mean fun, can get acted out through fun ways. So instead of how much money am I earning, you're allowed to have fun with your cornhole tournament with your friends, right?
Yes.
And get that sense of achievement in that way. Yeah, my parents are in their 80s, and my mother's bocce team is always winning the championship, and she gets a lot of pleasure out of that. And it's just great to be able to remember you can have fun competition. It doesn't not serious competition.
Yes, I agree. That's why I love to win the pub quiz too.
Yes. Absolutely.
What advice would you give your 30-year-old self?
Oh boy, my 30-year-old self was very serious and thought that they had to be a certain way. I practiced law when I was in my 30s, and I was a litigator, which is a field nowadays. There are more women litigators, but in Vermont, when I was practicing, there was many more women than in Boston when I practiced. Mm-hmm. And so I would show up at a deposition and they would ask me if I was a court reporter,
Oh, nice.
and that type of thing. I once was trying a case in a very small courthouse. And in order for me to pump, because I was in that phase of parenting where I was breastfeeding, they had to kick the judge out of the judge's office because there was no other private space in the entire building that had an outlet that I could plug my pump into. Right. So it was really hard to be a woman in this male space, even though I really loved the work. And so I think I would have told my younger self, stop trying to play with the guys. Just stop. Like, you're never going to be one of the guys. It's always going to be an uphill battle. Life is too short. Let's just lean into who you are and find the people that are going to like love you for who you are instead of you trying to pretend to be this other way. And so
such wonderful advice.
Yeah. Yeah. So now I only work with women, and most of my colleagues are women, and I'm not trying to be exclusionary. There's plenty of nice guys out there, my ex-husband being one of them. But I just find that especially in these male dominated fields, you can really start to get your sense of yourself can be damaged. And it's not because there's anything wrong with you. It's just the system you're working in. And I think that's the same with racism at a different level, obviously deeper and more horrible, and sexism. And now that I'm identified as what I would call us the rainbow people, or the alphabet people, because LGBTQ plus I plus gets long for everybody. But it's important to note because representation does matter. And I have found, even though I've very strongly, like, it's a new thing for me to just know that I'm part of that community, I also have learned things and I've experienced things differently after I came out that I didn't expect to learn that way. So I think just finding your people and having that nice, safe tribe of people that you can hang with and accept you for how you are. I wish that for every human on this planet.
Yes.
It's a valuable thing.
Yes. But sometimes it's a lesson that's hard learned, and you can't know it until you know it.
Right. And you can't find the people till you find the people, right? Right. You can't just snap your fingers and all of a sudden the people that will love you come out of the woodwork. But I do find that being yourself and bringing your authentic self is more likely to attract the right people.
Agreed.
Yeah.
What are you most hopeful about for the future?
For my future or the world's future? I get to pick.
Yeah,
I get to pick. Well, I do hope for a more open future. I know that there's a lot of division right now in the US, at least, and it seems like globally, and it seems like the forces of people who want to narrow what's okay and people who would like to open to all the diversity of the world. And in that regard, I wish for my kids that the world becomes more accepting of all the differences that actually exist. But
are you hopeful it will?
Right now,
wishful and hopeful are two different things.
Yeah. I think that we're in for a bit of a long haul here. It seems like people's positions are getting rather entrenched. And so I am hopeful in the very long run that, as they say, love will win and hate will not hate. And so I am in the long term hopeful for that. But I fear that there's more struggle for all of us to get to that point. So something I can guarantee that I'm hopeful about is just that if we don't squelch our kids will be a great future, right? I think of the 11-year-old and her spirit, and the kids, they have so much openness and optimism. And so I think if you can just look at that and remember that it exists simultaneously for them and us, we just need to take that lens of optimism and gratitude and really focus on the good, because it exists all the time. And if you turn on the radio or read the paper, you're not going to get the full spectrum of what goodness is happening out there. Even your podcast here, right? You're spreading this knowledge and these good stories and this wisdom that all of your interviewees have. And that's like spreading good in the world, and that has ripple effects. So
thank you.
So
I hadn't thought about it that way, but you're right.
Yeah. So I'm hopeful for the goodness in people rippling out.
Good. Me too. I applaud that. Are you reading anything that you'd like to recommend or binging anything?
It's funny that I'm binging Succession.
Which, love it.
Which is I'm up to date on now. But I occasionally do the fantasy thing. So I was a Game of Thrones fan. And now, because that's over, I started watching, I think it's called House of Dragons. And what I was seeing was this similarity in both Succession and House of Dragon. So completely different, I don't know what you'll call them, genres,
Yes.
but the themes of struggle for power and struggle for access to power and struggle for money and what people will give up and not have morals around just for the sake of power and money are in both of them. And so it's very much in my face. And I'm like, wow, I think hopefully as wisdom accumulates with age, to not be in that position where that's the highest value, so that you're not acting in your highest best self. That's what I was taking away from those. It was like, wow, this is the age old thing, these struggles.
Yes, it is.
And they're still happening today.
You'd only have to look at Washington to see that
Right,
same thing
exactly,
going on, right?
Exactly.
Same here in Canada, in Ottawa.
Yeah.
Some things, there's some lessons that humanity is bound to have to relearn with every generation, it seems, for some reason.
Absolutely. But yeah, and there's another book I'm reading by Dolly Chugh, and she's somebody I actually know. She's a amazing behavioral scientist, and she wrote, her first book was called The Person You Mean to Be, and it was a lens to look at how to not be racist and not discriminatory in any way. And then she's written another book, and now that we're recording, I'm like, and I can't remember the actual title of it, but it's about how to reconcile patriotism, even though we see the systemic issues that are there. And how can you love your country at the same time you see honestly the history of the country for what it is? And she talks about simultaneous truths and paradoxical thinking. And I just think it's a fascinating way to approach these complex topics in a really meaningful way. So, Dolly Chugh.
Sounds interesting. I'll find it and I'll leave a link to it in the show notes
so
that people can find it. Are you volunteering in the community or spending time that way these days?
In the past, I volunteered quite a bit with our domestic violence shelter. I was the chair of their board, and I spent over a decade on our local hospital board. And so when I adopted my new daughter, I cut down on my service for a little bit while we adjusted to the new parenting situation. So I'm almost always on at least 2 boards at a time, but right now I'm not. But I definitely, it's always on my mind. What's the next thing I'm going to be helping out with somehow?
Is there an app you couldn't live without?
Well, I never had Twitter. I'm not a social, I know that's your field, but I'm a late adopter to social media. I think there's upside to it, and I use it for what it is, but I never got on Twitter. And now with the most recent developments, I have no intention of getting on Twitter. So I can let Twitter just go. Goodbye, Twitter. But I think that would be my top let go. The rest of them I'd keep around. Yeah, I love connecting with people and old friends on Facebook. And I do a lot of my business work on Facebook and LinkedIn. So I like connecting with people. I've met people around the entire globe, right? You know, I have a friend in Finland. I talked to someone in Romania recently, and I work with a coach in the UK. So it's just all these global connections you can have right from your home office. It's just wonderful to me. And I've met them because of social media apps.
Yeah.
Twitter. Not on Twitter.
In fact, I'm on a podcast. It just got published today from a guy who runs a PR agency in Brazil. He has a podcast and found me somehow and invited me on his show. And we had a wonderful conversation. I've never been to Brazil. I would like to go someday. But yeah, it really is great. The connections that you can make and have really meaningful conversations like the one that we're having today. Is there an over 50s life hack that you would like to share?
If I had an over 50s life hack, it would be around making sure you stay in motion, because the only place I feel that any kind of aging is happening in my body, right, against my will. And all the research says you have to just keep moving to keep everything working. And so, and COVID and the shutdown around the pandemic was hard for some people. Used it to get fabulously fit. I was not one of those people. And so I feel like this is a use it or lose it decade. And I would recommend everyone use it while you got it. Because
it's perfect advice. I totally agree with you. But it's funny what you say about the pandemic, because I was running. I never ran my whole life. And when I turned 50, I was like, okay, I'm going to be a runner now. So I started running. And there's a big race locally that I signed up for every year, and that get me moving in like February to start to get training for it. But the year when they called the pandemic, like I distinctly remember having like this little nanosecond of joy. I was like, they're going to cancel the race and then I don't have to run anymore.
Yeah. And I'm an active person, but something about everything shutting down. There's only so much hiking, and
Yes.
it just gotta, but
just getting back to running now.
Good for you. Yeah. Yeah. I live purposely in the rural area. And so I have trails right out the front door. And so I just get to spend, my favorite thing is just spend a couple hours just out on the trail with the dogs, and it's beautiful. Nice. And I can be quiet and meditate in my own way. And that's active. And all the research shows walking is just as good as running.
Yes.
Especially if you got some hills in there. Yeah.
That's right. For sure. Probably more so actually, because running wears out your joints.
Well, yeah, I must say, I back in my earlier days, and in fact, on my 45th birthday, I think it was, I ran my first marathon, and I ran a few half marathons and a couple of marathons, and now that's exactly why I don't run, is because my knees hurt. So
yeah.
What are you going to do?
All right. Is there anything that you would like to share that I haven't asked you about?
Only that if you're someone over 50 and you haven't found your groove or your passion and you want a little kickstart, follow me on some social media, because I talk about this stuff all the time.
And I'll have links to all your socials in the show notes so that people can find you easily.
Yeah,
Thank you so much for coming on the call.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks for having this great project.
This has been 50 Women Over 50, a podcast for women whose personal confidence is born of experience. And thank you to my guest, Kirsten Beske. I think her advice about finding your tribe as the key to happiness and success in this life is spot on. And I hope that this podcast is helping you in this goal. I know it's helping me. So please see the show notes to find the links that you need to connect with Kirsten online, and for more information about her coaching business and some of the books and resources that we discussed on the show. And join me again for next week's show, when I will welcome my former client, Heather Morass, who in her 50s split with her husband and left a long-term job to set out to discover who she could become. And in doing so, she found a special someone who became her partner, both in business and in life. And the person she found is a little bit surprising. But that's next week. In the meantime, please drop me a rating or a review on Apple or wherever you get your podcasts. Let's connect and create a whole community of wise women over 50 by sharing a link to this show with your friends and connections. See you next time on 50 Women Over 50. I'm your host, Sherrilynne Starkie.